Well, good evening. Here we are at Evangel Foursquare Church again, and just praying that these lessons on joy are sinking in. You know, last week we talked about position, and maybe you've taken that step to begin to pray about who is someone in my life that I want to spend time with? Who is someone in my life that I see something different in them, and I want my life to be in that position? They're in that position because they've spent time with Jesus, and I pray that's the result of your prayer as you're praying for them. Maybe that door is beginning to open. Don't be scared about it. Step into that. Someone approaches you maybe that you're not having the courage or the affirmation. That's a person I need to spend with. But here comes along that person, and they come knock on your door. They call you up. They send you a text and said, hey, you want to begin to kind of talk and just get to know one another, and maybe I can share some of my life experience with you. You know what? I think that's an answer to God's prayer. So take them up on that and understand that you have a joy in your position. Tonight we're going to wrap up Philippians, and we're going to talk about joy and harmony. Joy and harmony. So we talked about joy and being thankful, joy in position, joy in just being there. Tonight we're going to talk about joy and harmony. I want to think about for a moment about our home, about our workplaces, about our relationships. Do we live in a social atmosphere that is loud, it's unstable, it's tense? Maybe it's peaceful, maybe it's fun-loving, maybe it's inviting. You know, I was raised in a home that was very quiet. My home now, married with 2 adult sons, it's fairly quiet, peaceful. Not often do we disagree or argue, and certainly we see things differently, but we don't let it come to a confrontation. So I would probably put my life on the backside of this, more peaceful, fun-loving, inviting. But I understand that not all lives are like that. All families, all relationships are. Unfortunately, there's people that thrive on the negative side of that. They like to be in the midst of that. To me, that's kind of crazy, but if that's where they fit, then that's where they fit, you know? But there's something about harmony. There's something about having peace. You know, you may have noticed over the past few weeks that I end these talks by using the word peace or peace be with you. You know, that's something that struck me a number of years ago. And we're going to talk about that tonight. That to have perfect peace is to have a right relationship with Jesus. 8 years ago, God moved me from where I was as a pastor to a new community, to pastor a local church. The name of the community I live in is Salem, which if we go back to a Hebrew word is shalom, which we go back to what we understand it to be, is peace. So I always have kind of tongue-in-cheek, you know, God's brought me to that place of peace. And even if maybe peace isn't in my heart at times, or comes out in my character, at least I live in peace. And I just have kind of grabbed a hold of that word, and it's a word I like to leave with people. Have peace. And be peaceful. So tonight we're going to look at that. We're going to look at Paul when he talks this out in the final chapter of Philippians, that we remember that joy comes from unity. And unity is living in and to be at peace with others. When we pick up in chapter 4, we find that Paul had 2 friends that are at odds with one another. You know, he says that he's encouraging the people at Philippi that these 2 people would have the same mind in the Lord. He says, and I urge you also, true companions, help these 2 women in whom I labored with me in the gospel, and also with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are written in the book of life. You know, God has called us to be at peace with one another. He also has called us to be at peaceful relationships. Contentions do happen. Difficult things do happen in relationships, and they become harsh at times. You know, in the very first church that I served as a youth pastor, many times I would go with our lead pastor as he would officiate funerals. And he would say something at every funeral, and I had picked up on, and every funeral, most every funeral I have ever officiated, I've shared this. And it's when I get to the end of the message that I would remind people that we're there to celebrate of the life of a loved one. But if everyone in that room would never change, we would never leave this room, we would live life in this group, somebody in that group will be next. Somebody in that room will breathe their last, and we would celebrate their life. So there's always this next. But also in that room, there's probably contentious relationships. There's probably relationships that are just not contentious, but have completely fallen apart. And I'll remind people at the end of that funeral service to not leave the end of that day, not just the end of that service, but do not let that day complete without making amends. You see, once that person no longer breathes here on earth and they exit, we can write a letter, we can in our heart say, I forgive them or I receive their forgiveness. But you know what? For me, because I've been there, it's just not the same to being able to go face to face with that person. And one or the other to say, you've hurt me. You've hurt me. And give them the opportunity to ask for forgiveness, or to go to a person and say, I know I have harmed you. I know that you need me to ask you to forgive me, and to do so. 2 years ago, I had an opportunity to be one of 3 pastors officiating a funeral of a dear, dear friend of mine, a leader in the church that I had pastored. Actually, we had made him an elder in the church by title. So 2 years ago, he lost his life to cancer, but he entered into the presence of Jesus. But I was one of 3 pastors that were part of that service, and I had shared that. 1 year later, my wife was at that service with me and another couple. 1 year later, the other couple was a relative of that man that we had buried a year previous. A year ago, the husband of that couple lost his life here on earth and entered into eternity with Jesus. And I preached his funeral, and I shared those same words. You see, he was the next. He was the next. He was at that funeral 2 years ago, and a year ago, he no longer lived here on earth, but entered into heaven. So he was the next out of that group. And he and I had gotten to be good friends over that year. And I know that God had begun to make though he was a Christ follower and loved the Lord, but I had seen changes about him. And I am believing that he took to heart what I had said a year before and made amends on some relationships, because he understood how vital it was to live a harmonious life, and in that there would be joy. Paul says here in verse 4, he says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication. With thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind through Christ Jesus. Paul says rejoice, and rejoice always. In all situations, rejoice. In the midst of coronavirus, rejoice. In the midst of a loved one no longer living life here on earth, rejoice. In the midst of losing a job, rejoice. It's easy to rejoice when we see that baby be born. It's easy to rejoice when we're at a wedding. It's easy to rejoice at Christmas when we open presents. But in the difficult times and the good times, Paul says rejoice. He says do it with gentleness. Do it with an ease. Do it without being pushy. Just rejoice and allow others to see that. He says don't be anxious. Don't worry. We know as humans we do worry, we do get anxious. But as I had said before, that the closer we are to Jesus, that anxiety and that worry, that season of that will be less and less and less, because our heart is matched up with Jesus, our mind is matched up with Him. And that anxiety, that negative feeling will begin to just fade away and turn gray. Paul says to be prayerful, to be thankful. Thankful is what we talked about the very first week. What's the result of living a life like that? He winds it up and he says it's peace. The result is peace. What does peace do? He continues on in verse 9 and he says, or verse 7, and he says that this peace that comes through Christ will guard over you. It will watch over you. It watches over your heart. It watches over your mind. It watches over your body. It watches over your soul. Peace. It's not that I got peace on the inside and craziness on the outside, or peace on the outside and craziness on the inside. It means that peace is all about me in my heart and my mind. My heart is my soul. It's who I am. It's my character. My mind is my thoughts. And there's peace. There's peace in both. What do I pair? How do I pair my thoughts with my peace? Verse 8, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The things which you have learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. It is simple. We read through that and we think, well, those are hard things. It's always hard to keep my mind in a positive area. But you know what? If you want peace, that's what Paul is saying we need to do, keep our mind in a positive area. It's not an aura, it's not good vibes, it's all of that, because positivity comes through the knowledge of who Jesus is in your life. We talked about position last week. So understand your position is to be in the position of Jesus, of where He would want you to be and who He would want you to be. And in the midst of that position comes peace, and in peace comes joy. The result of Paul living a life of joy, and then we're done, is verses 10 through 17. I'll just read verse 17, because Paul goes on, he talks about the generosity of the Philippians. That while he's been away and he's been in chains, there's times he's not been in chains, but he's been without finances or he's been without food. The Philippians knew the impact that Paul had made in their lives, and they moved money to him. They moved food to him. They moved their needs to him wherever it was, and they never forgot about him. They took care of him. So verse 17 says this, not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that abounds to your account. You see, Paul didn't want the reward. He didn't want the acknowledgement that he has done all of this great teaching and fellowship with the church of Philippi. He's saying all that time that I've invested with you, that I have just been there. I have been thankful. I've taken advantage of my position and have used it. The return is reciprocal. I have done that to you, so now you have done that to me. You have provided to me. His reward is joy. He saw those who attended to his need and that they would be rewarded, and they were his reward. He knows that he has a reward in heaven. I know, you know that you have a reward in heaven for your service to God. But in this point, Paul wasn't saying, okay, I know that I've got this great and marvelous crown waiting for me in heaven. He's saying it's right here, and it's you. You are my reward. Don't have joy? Be thankful. Don't have joy? Just be there. Don't have joy? Be in your position. Don't have joy? Be in harmony. Peace.